Right, it's 2 p.m. Let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming. It's exciting to be with you all virtually today. My name is Kira Dickey, and I'm the Market Development Manager here at Peerceptive. I'm excited to be your host today alongside my colleague, Jonathan Olshock. Before we dive in, just a couple housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and we'll share the recording along with additional resources with all registrants. We're going to wrap up the content today in about 30 minutes, but we'll stick around for further discussion at the end. Also, feel free to use the chat for any questions or comments throughout the presentation. Here's a quick look at our agenda. First, we're going to explore the benefits of peer assessment for psychology through a case study on Dr. Chris Shunn at the University of Pittsburgh. Then Jonathan will give us a brief overview of Peerceptive, specifically in the context of psychology. We'll end with a deep dive into a case study on Dr. Nick Duran from Arizona State University, talking about his experiences creating AI-resistant writing assessments and building career readiness. We'll go over a few tips for resisting AI that you can implement now and some ways that Peerceptive can help too, so stick around for that. Like I mentioned earlier, we'll have some time at the end for Q&A, but feel free to put questions or comments into the chat throughout the presentation. So with that, let's get started. Our first case study is on Dr. Chris Shunn, a psychology professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Chris uses two features of Peerceptive, both team member evaluation and peer assessment, so we'll touch on both. Chris is a leading authority on peer learning and a strong advocate of peer assessment with over 20 years of research in the field. With more than 250 students in his cognitive psychology course, Chris was looking for a solution to fairly and efficiently evaluate each student on complex performance tasks on a large scale. And Chris knew that what he really needed was an effective system for online peer assessment. So Chris actually developed Peerceptive as a research project, and it was later commercialized. Chris continues to use Peerceptive for his courses and to conduct research on peer assessment. So this is a quote from Chris. Peer assessment really works across STEM. All the things in the next generation of science and psychology standards involve complex performances. Students in Chris's course now complete 4 projects over the course of a semester, either individually or in groups. For each project, students work to create interesting infographics that explain psychological concepts to peers. Whether they're working in groups or individually, each student reviews 3 infographics per assignment, learning as they review. With over 107 group submissions per assignment, Chris cannot possibly manage the dynamic of each team, so he relies on team member evaluation to hold students accountable for quality group work. Peerceptive syncs groups from the LMS and administers team member evaluation only to students who are working in groups, which reduces administrative tasks for Chris. And while we're discussing group management, I wanted to quickly mention that we're working on a new group formation feature that will make it easier for instructors like Chris to create those groups. The group formation tool from Peerceptive will automatically group students based on their answers to an instructor-created survey. So definitely look out for that in the fall. Now we're going to jump into the improvements in equity Chris has seen from implementing peer assessment. The Boyer 2030 Commission recently released research-based recommendations for improving educational equity in higher education. One of the key recommendations is switching from multiple choice exams to authentic assessment. Research demonstrates that structured approaches to active learning strategies, such as peer assessment, are particularly useful for students from disadvantaged or diverse backgrounds. And this is certainly held true in Chris's course. Chris says, by leveraging peer assessment, each and every learner can experience rich performance tasks and get timely feedback. So this is a graph of data from Chris's course. So on the left, you can see average course grades from when Chris was using multiple choice exams. And on the right are the average course grades from when Chris switched to a project-based course. The orange bar in both cases represents grades for Black, Latinx, or Indigenous students, also referred to as BLI students, and the blue bar represents non-BLI students. The clear boxes, these boxes here, represent the achievement gap or the gap in grades between BLI and non-BLI students. So as you can see, switching to a project-based format has improved grades for all while significantly reducing the achievement gap. As Chris says, there are no longer meaningful differences. And just to quickly call back to Chris's previous quote, the only way for each and every student in such a large class to do these infographics and get timely feedback is through peer assessment. So now I'm going to pass the screen share to Jonathan to show us how psychology assignments might look actually in the tool.
Sorry, folks, couldn't find the unmute button there. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks Kira for that case study on Dr. Shun. So Peerceptive is a tool that was developed over 20 years of research at the University of Pittsburgh. Like Kira mentioned, it was developed by Dr. Shun, so this is one of those webinars where we get to give a case study and talk about Chris's research and what came out of that. One of the main points about Peerceptive is that it generates a grade that's as valid and more reliable than a single instructor grading. So what this means is that really, Peerceptive is really a key that unlocks the potential for these more complex types of activities in your class, because often when thinking about how to plan those out, the roadblock there is the assessment and the feedback part. How am I going to assign 100 students a project and then give them feedback? I just don't have the capacity, even with a few TAs. So Peerceptive really becomes the key to that, and the valid and reliable grading is one of those main reasons. Another one of those reasons is it can facilitate any type of project submission. So we see a lot of writing, a lot of lab reports and that sort of thing in psychology, but we also see a lot of more creative projects like video submissions, presentation uploads, and infographics like Chris does. Also, Peerceptive works really well in just about any kind of context. It can be used for in-person courses as a homework activity, or it can be used in online courses as a really truly good way to engage academic dialogue in those online courses. We've seen it used in courses from as few as 10 to 15 students, all the way up to thousands of students. So it really is flexible. And once you set up these peer assessment assignments, you really don't have to do much to facilitate them. So once they're set up and ready to go, the process moves students through, it distributes all the papers for you, and it really makes it simple from the instructor's seat. So this can save you a lot of time and help you focus time and attention on the students that really need the most help. The other thing to mention before I jump into the system itself is our integrations. So Peerceptive will integrate with any of the major LMSs, the 4 that you see here, and then many others. We use an LTI certification, if you're familiar with that. It's the, the standard in higher education for integrating with a common integration language with these LMSs. So students have single sign-on, instructors have single sign-on, and we can also pass grades back to the grade book. So it's as if they don't leave your course environment online. All right, so let me jump into Peerceptive and show you what some of these assignments look like. We're going to focus primarily on the student side of the system today, and I'll mention some of the instructor functionality as well, but we think it's really important for you to understand the process that the students will participate in these peer assessment assignments. So this would be the landing page for a student when they clicked on their assignment in the LMS. They would be taken to this link, which shows them all of their assignments and each of the steps of the assignments that they have to complete. So in this case, we'll click on the first assignment, and now we're taken to our assignment level dashboard as a student. This is really their graphic organizer that tells them all the different activities that they either have to do now or will do in the future. So there's 3 default steps in Peerceptive, and one of these 3 is actually optional. You can disable it, but The first thing is the students will submit some sort of work product. That could be, in this case, an infographic, but it could also be a video, it could be a written work, it could be a link to a portfolio. There's lots of different ways, and anything, any type of file can be submitted. There's no limitation on that. So this student has already submitted their infographic, and now they're starting to review others. That's what this review phase is for. So in the review phase, I will use a rubric to evaluate my peers' work. The third phase that we have on this assignment is what we call feedback, and we'll get into that in a moment. So first, let's dive into this review phase. So I'm going to click Start Review 1. The first thing that the system does on a new assignment for a student is it gives them some tips. The entire system is developed around the concept of helping students to be accurate and helpful reviewers. So we're trying to build collaboration skills as they're moving through this process. It's one of the extra benefits of peer assessment. Not only will all of your students give and receive really good feedback to one another, but they're also improving on those hard skills like collaboration, and constructive criticism, those sorts of things. And Kira's going to touch on that with her second case study at Arizona State after I'm done here. So on the left-hand side is the document that I'll be reviewing that my peer submitted. In this case, it's an infographic about depression. On the right-hand side is the rubric that we'll use. So the rubric in Peerceptive is made up of two different types of prompts. The first type of prompt is what you see here. This is a rating prompt. This is to generate quantitative feedback to the students. It tells them where they fall on a kind of typical matrix rubric. And it's designed very specifically to help students be good at scoring. If you just hand a paper to a student and say, put a grade on there and give some feedback, it's not going to be a very effective process. So what we do in Peerceptive is we guide them through that one step at a time, and help them to provide high quality feedback. The other benefit here, and actually the prominent benefit in the entire process, is that students improve more while they're providing feedback to their peers than they do by receiving feedback, either from peers or from instructors for that matter. So it's the actually act of providing the feedback where we see the most gains on subsequent assignments. We've done many studies where we do A/B testing, and one group of students just receives feedback, the other group of students just gives feedback, and then they iterate on those assignments and turn in the second draft. And almost to a fault, those who just provided feedback improved more on that second draft. So it's really a powerful tool for helping students learn on the giving side of the feedback loop. So the way the students interact with this is they would read the rating prompt, they would find the description that best matches this infographic, and they'll select it. And my apologies if the rubric doesn't align exactly, it's because it's our demo course. We can't use Dr. Shun's actual rubrics because of intellectual property rights, but this is something similar to that he would use. The second rating prompt here is about the support of the hypothesis. And again, they find the description that best matches this document and they select it. So one of the reasons why students are learning on the providing side here is because when we design rubrics in this way, it helps students to understand the expectations on which they will be reviewed as well. So it's not atypical for our support team to receive an email from a student halfway through the process saying, oh, I just started reviewing my peers and I realized that I need to make some changes in my document. Can I resubmit? And it depends on the assignment settings and all that good stuff. But it shows, that speaks to the impact of the providing side. They really see these rubrics and start to internalize what their expectations are. All right, so the next type of prompt is a commenting prompt. And again, we bubble up some tips here for them, how to be helpful reviewers. And we also message, if the assignment is set up this way, that part of their grade will be for the quality of their peer reviewing. So a Peerceptive grade is made up of how well my submission scores, as well as how helpful and accurate I was as a reviewer. So we start to message that to them there. It's a really important message to give the students, that there is some incentive for providing quality feedback. When they know that, they tend to give much better comments and be much more accurate with their rating. So this is our first commenting prompt. We have out-of-the-box rubrics that you can drop right into your course tomorrow. We can also take your rubrics and help you convert them into Peerceptive. Once they're in there, They stay in the system and you can reuse them semester after semester. And one of the things you can do in those rubrics is you can scaffold these commenting prompts. So this one is pretty typical. Comment on the effectiveness of the introduction. What are some of the strengths and what are some areas that could be improved? That's pretty classic how we would structure providing constructive criticism or constructive feedback to one another. But you can take that a step further, especially with first-year students. You can include maybe an exemplar comment right in your prompt here, or you could have an outline of here's the items that you should include in your comment. So you can really build in those collaboration skills that you want to see for your specific domain right into the rubrics. So they read the comment, then they put their comments in the box here. They can also pin those comments into the document somewhere. So if this comment goes with the section down here, they can pin that. And then when the author of this document receives it, they'll be able to see on their document where all of the comments are associated. That way they can look at it as kind of a heat map. If there's lots of comments on one section, that's probably an indication that they might want to take a look at improving that on the next draft. So those are the two prompts types. You can really order these any way you like. I'll just kind of quickly work through the rest of these, but these can be in any sequence, and you can have any number of these types of prompts in the rubric. You can also share these amongst faculty. So if you have a rubric that you share with your other cognitive psychology instructor at your school, you're able to share that via email. And if you're an administrator, you can also set those up to be available for anyone at the school. So I can set up University of Pittsburgh wide psychology rubrics if I want, and then instructors can use those in their courses. So that's the student side, and I've now completed my first review. The next task would be to start my second review, but in this case for the demo, we're not going to go through multiple reviews. The reason we, by default, students are required to do 3 reviews. That, by the way, that's completely changeable for your course. So if you just want them to do 1, or if you'd like them to do 5, that you can adjust that for your assignments. But what we've seen in the research is that 3 is really the ideal number if you are looking to improve learning outcomes. And there's a number of reasons for that. Number one, when seeing multiple perspectives on how other students, what their submissions look like, how they approach the problem, there's a lot of learning happening there. So seeing multiple perspectives is important. Also, when receiving feedback, if you receive similar comments from multiple sources, there's a much higher likelihood that you will affect change in your subsequent draft. So if 2 people tell you that your introduction needs to be improved, your people are much more likely to make that improvement rather than just hearing it from one person. Even if that one person, by the way, happens to be the instructor, multiple perspectives is the powerful point there. So that's why we have 3 by default, but again, that can be turned off or on. The feedback stage is the 3rd stage in the process here. This is optional. Most instructors in higher education do leave it on, but you can disable it if necessary. During the feedback phase, what happens is students receive their comments. So the authors of the work receive their comments. They get to take a look at them and they rate how helpful they found them to be on a scale of 1 to 5. So they read their comment and say, this was a very helpful comment, I'm going to score a 5. And then they have the opportunity to comment back to the reviewer and tell the reviewer how could it have been, what they liked about the review and how it could have been improved. So it's a nice way to close that loop and get some messaging back to the reviewer on how to build collaboration skills in the future, because how you deliver a comment sometimes is as important as what the actual content is that you're delivering. So that's the feedback phase. I'm not going to open that up right now. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to jump over to a complete assignment and show you what the results look like. So let me go back to my assignment list and we'll go to assignment number 2. I'm going to click view results. This is the result screen for a student. So at the end of every peer review or peer assessment assignment, they will have all of this information available to them that they can use to make changes in their work, or on a subsequent project, they can take that information and use it when they're building out subsequent work that they'll submit as well. On the right-hand side here, we have all of the comments that I received on my work, and it's sorted by topic. So I can kind of select a particular topic and drill down into there and find the information that's going to be helpful for me to make changes. In the middle here, we have the the breakdown of each of those criteria in the rubric. So every rating prompt, we have a score for the students. What this does is it shows them which skills they did well in and which skills they might need to work on a little bit for this particular assignment. So this student who we're looking at didn't score very well in introduction, but if we scroll through, we notice that their works cited page was excellent. So in this case, what we'd like to do is have the student focus on this introduction hypothesis skill so that they can improve that for future work. So one of the ways they can do that, they can click more and they can see the entire rubric here. They can read those higher up anchor descriptions to look for cues on how to improve and get better. The other thing you can do is each one of these rating prompts can have a resource associated with it. And at the end of the assignment, the system will automatically deliver all of the resources that a student needs based on their scores. So in this case, we told the system anyone who scores below a 2 on introduction hypothesis, send them a link to how to write better lab reports and write introductions and hypotheses. You could have a video linked here. You could also have a video file. So for the online instructors that are joining us, that's a really great way to get some extra face time with your students. If you just sit down and record a 5-minute video for each one of these skills, then as soon as the students are done, anyone who didn't score well in one of them will have a video waiting for them that's the instructor saying, well, it looks like you need a little bit of extra help in introduction. Here's 2 or 3 strategies that I've seen work in the past with students. Really nice way to add a personal touch and really meet the students where they are. That not everyone's going to come to your office hours. And so what you can do is you can pre-bake those in. As soon as the assignment's over, it automatically delivers. And again, those resources copy from semester to semester. So once you have this set up, it just kind of automatically runs itself. Last part to mention are the grades. Incentivizing students for not only the quality of their submission, but also the quality of their feedback is really important in order to stand up a good peer review or peer assessment process. And so that's what Peerceptive grades do. We have one overall percentage grade that can be made up of any of these 4 elements. So the submission score is how well my paper did on the rubric. And then these other 3 scores are all on the giving side. How accurate was I with my rating? How helpful was I as a reviewer in terms of my comments? And then task is, did I complete all of the steps? The nice thing here is that you can adjust these weightings based on the type of assignment that you're doing. So if you'd rather the submission grade was turned off, great, you can turn that all the way off. And then basically the students would just get a grade for the quality of their peer reviewing. The opposite is also true. If you just want the students to get a score for their submission, you can do that as well. We've seen lots of different variations of grading, and the system will score papers valid and reliably with no instructor intervention needed. So peer assessment with 3, multi-peer assessment with 3 reviewers will generate these accurate and reliable grades. There are ways for instructors to get involved though. And one of those ways is how Dr. Shun uses it. And I'm going to go back to our slideshow here. So in Dr. Shun's class, he uses what we call benchmark grading. With benchmark grading, it's a way for the instructor to only score 10 papers across the entire course. And then the system will use the peer grading to align it with the instructor grading and distribute the grades accordingly. So anyone who Chris assigned a grade of 80% to, anyone that has similar ratings to that student will also get somewhere around an 80%. If they're significantly lower, then they'll have a lower score, etc. So the instructors can see a little bit of the documents in their class and have some control over where those grades fall on the scale. All right, thank you. I'm going to throw it back to Kira for one more case study before we wrap up here.
Thanks, Jonathan. Sorry about that taskbar. So now we're going to get into our case study on Dr. Nick Duran of Arizona State University. Nick teaches over 250 students per semester in his cognitive psychology course, which is fully online and fully remote. He assigns 2 essays per semester. And before he started using Peerceptive, he had a small team of course assistants who provided feedback on the essays. These were graduate level students in psychology, so not only were they all busy with their own studies, but almost none of them had taken his specific course. So the feedback was usually very short, surface level, and it lacked a lot of the nuance that students had learned in class. So Nick actually now uses peer assessment in Peerceptive. Oh, I'm skipping past slides. So like Jonathan mentioned, there's a lot of flexibility with the grading in Peerceptive. So Nick has 3 students review each essay, and his course assistants act as a 4th reviewer. So the students and the course assistants both work through Nick's rubric in Peerceptive. So each student gets multiple perspectives of feedback on each of Nick's specific rubric points. And the effect of this is that after the first essay, students have time to reflect on their performance, and the second essay is usually much better. And Nick has also noticed that students are more motivated to learn when they know their peers specifically will be reading and rating their work. So like he says here, just the idea of being assessed by your peers gives an added motivation that I wasn't seeing when the essays were graded only by the CAs. Students are willing to put in the extra time and effort to make sure they understand what's required of them because they want that positive feedback from their peers. Because of this, Nick started increasing the complexity of the essay, making harder prompts and expecting more from his students. And this has only become more important in the last 2 years. Because now we have AI, so the simpler your prompt is, the easier it is for AI to generate a response to that prompt. So that brings us to talking about AI. Because peer assessment requires students to actually read and respond to their peers' work, students naturally engage in critical thinking around course content while they do it. So that's the first way that peer assessment prevents students from outsourcing their key learning to AI. So like Nick says, how do I assign writing where I can have some confidence that AI isn't performing all of the thinking for the student? So when students are reading and responding to their peers, they're doing some sort of thinking regardless of if they submitted an AI-generated response. Specifically with Peerceptive, students are graded on their reviewing activity. So if they haven't actually done the work and submitted their own assignment, their feedback isn't going to be as helpful or accurate. So a low score on reviewing can function as a second check. So like Nick says here, the assignment is not just what they've written on the page, but also how they're doing the assessment, their accuracy and helpfulness in giving feedback. That alleviates some of these worries about AI technologies. If they don't understand the material, their accuracy score is going to suffer. And Jonathan just demonstrated that in the tool, so we won't really discuss that anymore. But I actually caught up with Nick not too long ago, and he told me some more low-tech solutions that he's been using. So like I mentioned earlier, making the prompt more complex is one strategy. Another strategy is allowing students only to cite materials from the course itself. So Nick will actually give them a selection of trusted sources, and they are only allowed to access and cite those for the essay. And I've seen other instructors do this where they give them a video of themselves or a document or a case study that they have to specifically use for this assignment, and they can't go find other resources online. And another method that he's using is to have students submit their document history. So if you use Google Drive, Google Docs will actually keep a log of all of the changes that you made to the documents. So when you see that log, it's more obvious if a student has gone in and just copied and pasted an answer, because all of a sudden there's a bunch of text where there was no text before. So now let's dive into the career readiness benefits that Nick has observed. One of the key skills students develop is giving criticism with tact. So this involves learning how to provide constructive feedback in a respectful and helpful manner, which is essential in any professional setting. Another crucial skill is receiving criticism with grace. Nick has noticed that students often struggle with this, but it's a valuable ability in a variety of contexts. As Nick puts it, how to receive constructive criticism and integrate it, I found, is a skill a lot of students don't have exposure to. In any job that they have, there are going to be opportunities to give and receive constructive criticism. How to deal with that graciously in a way that will improve you is a skill. Being resistant is missing out on an opportunity for growth. And Nick also mentioned to me that a lot of his students do go on to that graduate level and they become these course assistants. So then it's literally a part of their job to give and receive feedback. And that wraps up our case study on Nick. So I wanted to quickly touch on our live support because it can be a little overwhelming to get started, especially the first time you see the tool. So I just wanted to mention that our support is available 24/7. They are US-based former educators who have certifications in instructional design, and they are more than happy to help you get started. You can meet with them by scheduling an appointment or dropping into their office hours, and they can help you add a peer learning step to any existing assignment or create something new completely tailored to your course. They will literally sit on Zoom and push the buttons for you if that's what you want or that's what you need. They can also help with our team member evaluation or live presentation tools and troubleshooting. They're there 24/7 for you guys. And we've been getting a few questions about pricing during these webinars, so I wanted to let you guys know that access to Peerceptive can be purchased online or through the university bookstore directly by students for $22.50 per course, which is much less than a traditional textbook. Or Perceptive can be licensed on a per course basis for an entire department, college, program, or at the university-wide level. Many universities already have a campus-wide subscription with Peerceptive, meaning you and your students could get started right away for free. So to find out more information about getting started in your course or at your school, email info@peerceptive.com. That wraps up the end of our presentation. I want to thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you taking time out of your summer vacations or your busy start of semester season to learn about peer assessment. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll have a few moments here to keep answering them. Thank you all.